Today we're going to talk about how to spice up your team meetings for better results. Laura wants you to know she's our technical person handling us on the back end. If you have any trouble, you can chat with her. I will not see that, but she will. And she said if you have trouble with the sound or you can't see the PowerPoint, try doing it in another browser. Try switching browsers. So we are going to work together for 22 minutes or less. And as we talk about how to spice up your meetings, you'll have a realization, hopefully, why it's better to have short meetings and to tell people that you're going to finish on time and then to actually do that. So let's see if oopsie, sorry. I have to learn how to use my own technology here. Okay, so what does your team think about your meetings? We have some excellent research from a company called Atlassian, and I'm giving them a shout out because they do amazing research. I think they're a project management software company. That's probably oversimplifying what they do. But their latest research tells us that the average worker attends 62 meetings a month, that 50% of that time is considered wasted by the people attending the meeting. So they waste 31 hours a month, or we all waste 31 hours a month in unproductive meetings. 91% of the people in your meetings daydream. And that is that one thing, that cognitive thing that we can't control. We can't control what they're thinking about, but we can lure them into thinking about what we want them to think about, which is really the essence of today's webinar. 39% of people reported that they sleep during meetings. 45% feel overwhelmed, which is sad, right? We don't want that. That's such a productivity block for them to feel overwhelmed. And 73% do other work while they're in your meeting. So, oopsie, sorry, I get a little ahead of myself. So the first tip, we're going to whip through 7 tips, and I'll talk a little bit about each one, and then we have a little special meeting cheat for you at the end. So tip number 1 is to ask your team for a do-over. If you're going to implement anything that we talk about today, then you're going to need to kind of hit the reset button with your team. So, you know, this is kind of a parenting model as well. It's never too late to say, hey, I messed up as a parent. I screwed up. I want to make it better. And it's the same way with your team. If your meetings have been running over, or they're not staying on task, or they're uninspiring or boring or excruciating, you can always begin again. Tip number 2, you need to set new ground rules for your meetings. The first and most important that I want to impart to you as far as rules are concerned is that your meetings start on time and end on time every time. As busy as we all are and as much content as we need to cover, it's just inexcusable to finish late. Sometimes it's really hard to start late and you have to kind of change the behaviors of your people that are coming in late. But one thing that will keep people to the time is if you start on time every time and they miss. You can also do fun things like charge them $5, or they make them buy the coffee, or make them stand outside if you want to be really mean. But definitely, as you hit the reset button, you want to start on time, end on time every time. Also, tell them what you expect them to bring to the meeting and make sure that they do that. You'd be surprised. I mean, some people don't bring any sort of implement to take notes or to record their tasks after the meeting. And if that's not being done, then have a chat with the person or the group and make sure they do it. The third is to consider changing your agenda strategy. So I know that a lot of time management experts say that, you know, a good meeting has a very tight and specific agenda. And if you don't submit your agenda items prior to the meeting, then they don't get discussed. But this is sort of the antithesis of a learning-based meeting. So I've given you a little format here. I'll read it to you in case you can't see the screen. But you want to have an agenda for general headings, but not specific topics. So for example, if you have a 60-minute meeting, my recommendation is that you spend the first 10 minutes in learning and development, which we'll talk about on another slide. Then you spend 10 minutes going around and having people do individual updates, but you keep that tight and keep everyone focused so that they're listening to each other. If they just give their update and then they tune out and look at their phone, then it's a completely ineffective use of time. Then the next 10 minutes, you can agree on the intended outcomes based on their updates. There should be a place within your meeting where people can come with problems or concerns or things that need the group attention. And obviously you're in charge of whether it's a yes or a no, but to have a pre-structured agenda, I think it's really just reviewing the past in that case. It's not very present oriented, and people need access to you and the rest of the team for their present moment issues. Then in the next 20 minutes, you address the outcomes that you decided you're going to work on or cover your KPI, whatever it is that you're there to cover. And then the last 10 minutes, review success and action points. It's so important to have time to kind of package what you're going to do. Who is allowed to hear what we just decided on? We make all of these big decisions in meetings, and then we don't take that 10 minutes to just package the information. Who's going to hear it? Who's going to communicate it? Who's going to do what? And where that accountability is. So obviously it's specific to your industry and to your department, but maybe consider scrapping the whole strict agenda format. Tip number 3, so now we're getting really into the content. And tip number 3, if you leave with nothing else today, it's this. Devote 15 to 20% of your meeting time to some form of growth and development. So fill in the blanks here. So just close your eyes for a second, unless you're driving, and answer this question in your mind. If everyone on my team were suddenly an expert at blank and really hone their skills of blank, we would be significantly far ahead of where we are today. So think about the skills that your team needs to kind of take it to the next level, because this really is about getting better results. But we don't always get better results by just simply pushing people and holding them accountable. They need some additional learning. And it doesn't always have to be in a whole day workshop. You don't have to send them to corporate, to get that training. They can get information from you and each other, which we'll talk about. And it can add so much. So whenever I talk about this, people get nervous because they think, oh, I don't have time to create this. I'm not a good curriculum development expert, but you really don't have to be. So when it comes to engagement, that's really what you want to think about. And it's really only 10 minutes of content. So think in tiny, tiny topics. Some data to remember is that only 29% of our people are engaged. Only 29% of workers in this country are engaged. And the whole rest are either not engaged or actively disengaged. I think the stat is something like 35% are actively disengaged. That is not good. And so obviously you want to cater your learning and development to your top people, your top performers, not necessarily the disengaged, but hopefully to kind of bring them in. So a tiny topic that you could think about is like bring a customer issue. You can do case studies like that. That can cover the next 10 meetings where you start collecting data, collecting information, collecting anecdotes on case studies within your organization. You discuss them as a group for 10 minutes. Totally excellent use of your time. A communication tip, maybe how to craft an email. Maybe you use some of the better writers in the group to talk about how they do it. Any self-development topic is great. Anything that makes you a better person or a more professional person is a great tiny topic for your 15 to 20% of your meeting, or just think in 10-minute segments. So the next tip is to invent some fun learning games. You know, don't worry about the chance of you seeming tacky or unprofessional. Fun is a really important part of learning. It's a really important part of how our brains work. And while you can't have, you know, games and fun all the time, but interspersing in your meetings some game-oriented learning is really where the trends are going. So one is to create a Jeopardy game. Think about some gaps in your team's skills and learning, and write, you know, over the weekend or whatever, with all the extra time that you have, write some Jeopardy, write some topics, and people have to answer in Jeopardy format. You could play that game sort of once a month if you have a weekly meeting. The balloon pop game. I think I invented this about 25 years ago, and it still works like crazy. So let's say that you have a meeting where you want to recognize others or go over your KPI or your matrix, or you want to recognize their results in some way. So prior to the meeting, you take little pieces of paper that have prizes on them. They could be a gift card or a weekend away or whatever you have access to as far as prizes. You put the little piece of paper in the balloon, blow it up, tape it to the wall. As you announce their numbers, they get to go over to the wall, pop the balloon, and get a prize. Totally exciting. You will be amazed how excited they are at that stupid balloon game. It works every time. And you know, if you're kind of short on funds in your department, it can be things like M&Ms or a Starbucks card. It doesn't have to be extravagant, but it is always a great idea if you tell them in advance there's something really big in there, you know, like a $250 Nordstrom card, and then everyone is excited to try to get that card. Another game you can invent is a card game. This is so easy to do. You put a series of questions that you want your team to answer or discuss with each other on little pieces of paper. Take it to Kinko's or, you know, to your admin and get it laminated, and then you can play this engaging card game. I attended a really cool meeting a couple weeks ago where the head of the facilitator gave us each 24 pennies. And the penny represented an hour, you know, each hour of the day. And then she did a few exercises with us about how we were going to use our 24 pennies on that day. Really effective, you know, just that tangible pennies. Everybody got to take their little bag of pennies, and it was really moving that she took the time, you know, there were probably 30 of us in the room, that she took the time to separate out all those pennies. She probably had to go to the bank and get pennies and put them in little Ziplocs. And as you spend time and invest on these little things for your team, you are creating a connection and a bond, because on some level, they can see that you're doing this for them. The next tip, number 6, is to let them teach each other. So once you kind of, if you know, it depends how good your meetings are now. If they're pretty exciting, then you can go right into this, letting them teach each other. If your meetings have been pretty boring and stoic, you might want to take some, you know, take this next quarter and you kind of do all the work. But then once they're kind of, you know, sick of you teaching them, let them teach each other. So here are some examples. You can read a book together and have them present a chapter. Now, when you do this, you want to choose a book that everyone will read, which means it needs to be a very short book. So a good example is Strength Finders, the Strength Finders 2.0. Buy everybody a copy of that book. And it's a super quick read. They get to take their Strength Finders test. If you haven't already done this with your team, it's awesome. It's not very expensive. The Strength Finders people, which are Gallup, connected to the Gallup group, they have a ton of free information on their Strength Finders website. And, you know, you can print out door hangers and name tags and desk tags with your strengths on them. And it, you know, that could get you through 2 or 3 meetings of discussion about the top 5 strengths of each person. And you could assign each person to kind of talk about their strengths and, you know, do it in really any format. But if you're going to choose a book, make sure that it's a short book. and hold people accountable to actually reading it. So a lot of the parables like Death by Meeting or 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, look for a small book. If it's story related, even better. Another thing you can do is assign them with a section of an initiative for them to present. Like, let's say you have a big initiative that your department or company is launching. You can assign them, if it's a complex element, you can assign them with part of that complexity that they're going to present. And whenever you let your team teach individually, that gives you a chance to have a one-to-one with them prior to that meeting so that they're all aligned, that they feel supported, that they do a really good job, because you want this to be a positive experience for everybody. And it just has, multiple benefits. Another thing you can do is throw out a problem or a dilemma and ask everyone to keep it a secret, but to come with their top secret solution to the next meeting. And then they get 2 minutes to present on that. That can be such a productive brainstorming session. You're keeping people engaged, and you're getting ideas that you might not have gotten in your regular meeting format. Another thing that you can do as a team is to conduct industry benchmarking investigations. So let's say, for example, that you've decided that you need a project management software. Instead of just doing all that research yourself, assign it to your team and have them each take a project management software that they investigate, and they come back to the meeting and the next meeting or 2 meetings from now and present their findings so that you're making a decision as a team. Again, multiple benefits to that. Tip number 7, the last step, is to radically change up the venue or content of your meeting. So one idea is to go on a field trip. And I always say that meeting content needs to be relevant. So if you're going to play a game or, spice up your meetings, it needs to be relevant. But when it comes to a field trip, it does not necessarily need to be relevant. Sometimes it's just a great idea to take them to the zoo, or take them bowling. Go to a really nice restaurant, splurge on something special, or have special food brought in for a meeting. Just, it's a relationship that you have with your people. And so spicing up a relationship works the same whether it's at work or at home. You can invite a guest speaker. Again, you want to kind of make sure that it's relevant and really control that message and meet with the guest speaker ahead of time. It could be someone from another department. It could be someone in your industry that happens to be in town or that is special. It could be someone that is there to teach one of those tiny topics to help self-development, to help your team develop themselves. Another thing that you can do as far as radically changing up is show a movie. If there is a favorite movie, you have to be careful because we're very subjective. And sometimes our all-time favorite, most meaningful movie, like Get Shorty or something, could have meaning for you, but it might confuse others or be inappropriate. But if there's an appropriate movie, show the movie to your team. Or go to a movie together. Again, make sure that you screen the movie ahead of time so that you're not, creating a hostile work environment or making your team feel sexually harassed. We do live in that work environment nowadays, but it can be a really fun outing. Give everyone $20 to spend at the concession counter, and make sure their schedules are cleared so that they can go to a movie together. Sometimes, like, kids' movies are safe, they're fun, they're immensely creative, and that can be a terrific way to kind of change it up. So the last thing, I told you that we have a cheat for you to use in your next meeting, and that is the work mode assessment. So you don't even have to worry about the URL, although it's managementmomentum.net//work mode, WORKMODE. It's an assessment that I created. It takes like 2 minutes to take. You can take it yourself, get your results, and then you can forward the link to your team, and then you can all discuss your work mode. It puts you in a category of being process-oriented or results oriented. There's no better way to be. And actually, if you're kind of in the middle, it's probably the way to go. But it can create a great discussion for you and your team on what tasks need more process orientation and what tasks need more results orientation, and how we tend to default extreme to one or the other. So I hope this is helpful to you. I thank you so much for listening in on our webinar, and you will be routed to the work mode assessment after, and I look forward to hearing your feedback. I hope you have a terrific next meeting. Thank you. Have a great day.